All right, next up we have Priest. Priest has an interesting theme in this set of damaging itself. Starting off with Sensory Deprivation. This is not a damage yourself card, but it cares about yourself being damaged. 6 cost Shadow Spell. Summon a copy of an enemy minion if you have 20 or less health. Destroy the original. So, obviously, decks that have ways to damage themselves, get a lot of value out of this. Even if you don't have the 20 or less health, being able to get a copy of some enemy minions can be quite strong. But obviously, basically, 6 cost, steal your minion, right? It's not full on steal because I do still get death rattle effects. But being able to somehow leverage your health as a resource and then use that to turn on cards like this does feel quite powerful. Biddle-doo. That's me clicking on the next card and not clicking quite closely. Because that's the next card, Acupuncture. So this is probably not the sort of card that you want to play alongside Sensory Deprivation, unless you're just using Sensory Deprivation in like a really aggressive deck, which doesn't necessarily feel like it belongs in, but this is basically just Mind Blast both of us. Deal 4 damage to both players. This can be powerful in the sense of it's just an efficient way to damage your opponent if you're playing a hyper-aggressive deck. It can also, be hey, my deck can heal this well, so it is not really something that I'm worried about. And also things that can care about you damaging yourself, like the Sensory Deprivation or other priest cards. So this, again, like if there is like a hyper burn aggro focused priest deck, this is obviously going to be a fairly central role. And there are other cards like this, Brain Masseuse, 2/4 for 1. Whenever this minion takes damage, also deal that damage to your hero. Shield Slam lethal on this one, but this can be a very powerful, just really difficult to remove early game tempo minion for an aggressive deck. It is undead. I don't think there's any really undead priest synergies right now, but aggressive Shadow Priest style deck with Acupuncture with this can put in a lot of pressure very quickly. Next we have Narain Soothe Fancy. I think it's one of the more interesting of the cards we've seen so far. Battlecry, get 2 fortunes that are copies of the top card of your deck. So my understanding is that this will, the fortune cards will kind of be like a Chameleos that'll keep changing into whatever the top card of your deck is, and that's interesting in a number of ways. One, you have the possibility of getting, multiple copies of additional cards in your deck, which can be very interesting, especially for something like a Reno Priest deck. And two, you get information about what's coming up your next card. There's also cards that interact with the top card of your deck in Priest. I think this is one of them. Yes. Twilight Medium. A 6-cost 5/6 taunt with Battlecry. Set the cost of the top card of your deck to 1. So this, the Twilight Medium, in combination with our buddy Narain, can potentially not only allow you to get a 1-cost copy of your next card, but also play multiple additional copies of it right now with your fortunes. So say the top card of your deck is Reno. Not that you really want to play multiple Renos, or Elise, right? You're like, okay, I have my Narain. I have my fortune, in hand. I'll play my Twilight Medium. I'll get a 1-cost copy of set the Elise to 1 cost, and then I'll play the 1-cost fortune Elise in my and then I just still have this Elise that I draw next turn, and then I have, granted, you probably won't want Elise twice, but Amanthul, whatever, in the same turn. So many powerful things that you can do with that. So these I think are really cool. I'm obviously someone who really enjoys controlling mid-range style, especially minions oriented priest decks. I love the some of the things that are possible with Reno Priest right now, and this gives you a lot more sweet, fun options, I think, that I'm excited to try. Next we have Chillin' Vol'jin. 3-cost 3/3. Battlecry, choose 2 minions, swap their stats. So old school Vol'jin just stole someone's health. This one, say your opponent has a big taunt and you have a couple of little guys. You're like, all right, I'm gonna swap your big taunt with my guy. I'm gonna kill your taunt with my other little guy and go face. Definitely feels like a powerful card in an aggressive priest deck with small minions, because you're gonna want to have small minions swap their big minions, right? Also, Hunter Tourist. We did take a look at the Hunter cards in this set, and there were some cool options. There's the Sasquatch that we saw that could be cool in kind of any priest deck, really. But This one does feel like it wants to largely go into like an aggressive deck. You could have a priest deck that gets to play death roll, right, with your tourist card. You could that card doesn't necessarily feel like it wants to play an automaton thing. Um, but you do have, maybe it is an automaton deck and you play the trusty fishing rod. All kinds of neat options. But like, last worst case scenario, there's always this. There's always, hey, I can just do whatever I did again. So, but yeah, getting back to priest. Next card is Sauna Regular. A 5 cost 5/5 taunt, costs one less for each time your hero has taken damage on your turn. So obviously wants to be used with self damage effects. There aren't really like priest weapons, although you could tourist for a hunter weapon and use that. It does feel like you can obviously use like brain masseuse to trade into your opponent's minions. And this can just get pretty efficient, right? It already starts with a 5 cost 5/5, which is not great, but a 4 cost 5/5 taunt is pretty great, and a 3 cost 2 cost 1 cost 0 cost, all of those are quite powerful. So yeah, this definitely feels like a pretty strong card. I think it's like Demon Hunter that can tourist into Priest too, so this would be a very powerful card for them to tourist into when they attack into your stuff. As far as those options are concerned, but yeah, definitely, if there are additional ways to deal damage to yourself, like this Nightshade Tea, um, 2 cost spell, deal 3 damage to a minion, deal 2 damage to your hero. So this is a drink, so 3 casts possible with this. Very easy to reduce the cost of Sauna Regular down when you have triple cast available for Nightshade Tea. The fact that it's only to a minion does obviously make it a little bit less outrageous in terms of the amount of damage you're able to do with it. But very efficient removal. Priest typically doesn't have super efficient like damage based removal like this. But being able to burn down your opponent's minions, heal yourself up, whether it's through your hero power, whether it's through life steal, certainly some powerful options there. Next, we have Hot Coals. 3 cost fire spell. Weird there's a priest fire spell, but deal 2 damage to all enemies. If your hero took damage this turn, deal 1 more. So this obviously a powerful AoE tool. 3 cost deal 2 damage to all enemies is also a burn spell. It's not just your opponent's minions, so it's not just like a holy nova. But if you're combine this with any of the ways various ways you can self damage to fire that off. It's pretty powerful. Like 3 damage AoE to just your opponent's stuff is very, very strong effect. And lastly, Rest in Peace. 3 cost shadow spell. Each player summons the highest cost minion that died this game. We don't really have like much in the way of like res priest right now. And like priest does have some reasonable ways to like poof your opponent's minions. So if you have, say, Amanthul, or you're stealing things with Yogg, or you're renewing them, you can try to make sure that they don't have big things to possibly get back with this, whereas you do. But there's not like, we don't have things like Shadow Essence to get like giant things to then resurrect, like exist in Wild or have existed in previous standard formats. So this is one that I don't know that necessarily has a home right now in any sort of priest archetype, and I don't know that there's enough support to make it into kind of a reanimation priest style archetype. But I do think this is certainly a card that has a lot of potential if it has the appropriate support eventually. So overall, I definitely think that Priest has a lot of interesting tools. I think the aggro Priest direction, the self damage Priest, is certainly something that there's a lot of tools in this set to support. So obviously that's like kind of the major direction that this expansion is looking to push people. Even like the fact that the tourist goes to Hunter. I mean, it is interesting. There are frequently, cards in Hunter that's like, okay, well, this isn't necessarily a card that's great for Hunter because, you want it to be, it's more of like a controlling card. I don't think this set really has, other than Sasquatch, necessarily cards that feel that way. And a lot of the things that you do potentially have to recast. I mean, there are some pretty powerful things if you were to say tourist for Sasquatch, like be able to recast a bunch of hot coals or whatever. Recast, this if you're at like a high life total. The acupuncture can be pretty strong. But I think the card that I'm most excited about for Priest is definitely Narain. Narain is like just a card that can go into kind of any Priest deck that's looking to play like a longer value sort of game, and it gives you a lot of cool utility. that I think is very fun and a lot of cool information that definitely makes the game have a lot of more interesting decisions and options when you're playing. So this is my vote for my favorite priest card in the set, and I expect to play Narain quite a bit. All right, next up we have Rogue. Our first card in Rogue is Treasure Hunter Eudora. Coming at us from the Battlegrounds. 6 cost 4/5 at Battlecry. Go on a side quest, discover amazing loot. Play 3 cards from other classes to complete it. So what this does is you can discover I think one of the old duels cards. I think there's a certain set of them that you're able to get. But basically this is like, hey, play cards from other classes and then discover a duels treasure, which is cool and pretty powerful. I think it would be also sweet. You can like shadow step this, cast it multiple times, and get multiple loots. I imagine that the side quest doesn't stack. That you can't play the same one multiple times at the same time. Like you couldn't shadow step Eudora and play Eudora again. You'd have to wait until you'd played the 3 and then play it. But I think it's just a really cool card. Obviously has a ton of variability, both in terms of you actually get from this, but also like what the game looks like getting there, because you have to play cards from other classes that you have to have generated somehow in order to actually turn this effect on. So this is, I think, the sort of card that makes me want to play Rogue. Certainly seems like it has the potential to be really fun, and I'm looking forward to going treasure hunting. Next, we have Petty Theft. Get 2 random 1-cost spells from other classes. If you are looking to go on a treasure hunt with Eudora, or you're looking to enable Velarok or whatever, this is a great way to do it. Very, very quick way to get cheap things that you can play. So yeah, if you're looking to enable specifically cast spells from other classes, this is a very easy way to do it because you're guaranteed to get 2 of them, and they're 1-cost spells, so it's gonna be about as efficient as possible. Obviously, from like a power level perspective, it is relatively low impact compared to pretty much any of the other thief effects. So if you're looking for impact from them rather than enabling effects like Eudora, you can definitely do better elsewhere. Next up, we have Snatch and Grab. 8-cost spell, destroy 2 random enemy minions. Cost 1 less for each card you've played from another class. This is one of the things that maybe Petty Theft can help enable. This just doesn't feel like a powerful enough effect to really, unless you're playing a deck that's like, hey, I'm just going to cast tons of stuff from other classes. You're gonna have to cast a ton before this feels like it's at all worthwhile. And even then, like, the effect you're getting is just kill 2 random enemy minions. That obviously in certain situations could be really powerful, but is it worth playing a card that is bad until you've done a lot of this and only getting the reward of, I guess I kill 2 things? It feels like it's not a tempo effect until you've invested a ton of mana already. It's not like something that actually like wins you the game. It just feels like it's pretty unlikely to be something that that you really want to build your deck to support, because it is fundamentally a reactive effect. Next, we have Metal Detector. After hero attacks and kills a minion, get a coin. It's interesting. I could maybe see wanting to play this in Wishing Well Rogue, where you really want to generate as many coins as possible. The fact that you have to attack and kill a minion rather than just attack is a huge downside in terms of being able to rely on this. If there's a metagame where like attacking into a minion for 2 is very likely to get you a coin, great. Otherwise, this feels like it's pretty unlikely to be a meaningful card in most matchups. Next up, we have Maestra Mask Merchant, Warlock Tourist, and Battlecry discover a hero card from the past. So this is kind of hilarious, right? Like Maestra coming back and she's like, hey, I'm going to pretend to be someone else. This is an awesome card, right? The fact that it's Warlock Tourist already means that if you're playing a deck that cares about playing cards from other classes, you're adding 1 to your deck, so you fundamentally already have that. In the Battlecry, discover hero card from the past. Notably, A, hero cards are really powerful, right? Like lots of the old hero cards are really powerful. And B, once you play a hero card, you become that class. So it fundamentally means that you recast all of your rogue spells when you play Tess. And that can be really, really strong. That is, weirdly enough, an argument that makes like snatch and grab more powerful in a deck like that, right? Like if you're playing a deck that's looking to play like a bunch of off class cards, and then you snatch and grab, and then you play Maestra, and then you play Tess, you just like basically your Tess becomes kill all your opponent's stuff because you played snatch and grabs, is kind of interesting. So yeah, it is. I think overall Maester's a really interesting card. I'm excited to just do wacky wild things by becoming other classes and other heroes. So certainly the sort of cards that make me want to play Rogue. Next we have O Manager. Deal 2 damage, combo get a coin. Again, the sort of card that's if you're playing a Wishing Well deck, if you're playing a deck that's like trying to spell combo off, it's just a kind of solid utility-ish card. It is relatively low impact, just 2 for 2 damage, but the combo get a coin certainly feels like it has some solid potential. Next we have Knick Knack Shack. 3 cost location. Draw a card. If you play it this turn, reopen it. So this is like Miracle right now, right? This is like, hey, you want to play a ton of cheap cards in your deck and just chain them with this. So as long as you're like, like cast a spell, cast a spell, cast a spell, cast a spell. Draw a card, draw a card, draw a card, draw a card. This kind of feels like it wants to go in like the giant the giant decks, right? Like this is another card draw effect that you can like kind of can be a multiple card draw effect. It can also just be if you're looking to multiple clockwork giant or whatever. This is another like just like way to chain through with that. That could be interesting. Next we have Conniving Con Man. 4 cost 4/4 pirate. Battle card. Replay the last card you've played from another class. So this is a mini Tess, right? And this is actually pretty interesting. Be able to have access to mini Tess to like just hey, I got like a high impact thing, I want to play it. This is obviously the sort of card that works much better with things like Velarok than things like the Petty Theft. You definitely want to play high impact things off of your Conniving Con Man rather than play low cost spells that just make your other stuff cheaper. But again, another fun incentive to play sort of thief style rogue. There's obviously the sort of the excavate rogue decks already lean into being able to use a lot of that, but I imagine if you wanted to really lean into it, maybe you go away from the excavate direction and you're more focused on sort of the quests like Eudora and trying to get high impact things to leverage with Conman. Next up we have Sea Shill. 3 cost 3/2 with Battlecry. The next card you play from a non-rogue class costs 2 less. Weirdly, that this one is specifically says non-rogue rather than another, even when a bunch of the other ones say another. Like this one says another, this one says non-rogue, which is a little weird to me. I'm trying to think of why that would matter. They just have different wording. But again, obviously a pretty powerful effect to help enable being able to use something like this. Oh, I guess like you could theoretically tourist the Sea Shill in to your deck and use it for a discount, which is interesting. This is the not of this turn effect too. Notably, this one is an effect that carries over, so you could just play this on 3 and have the modifier for multiple turns throughout the game. Anyway, lastly, we have Swarthy Sword Shiner. Battlecry set the attack and durability of your weapon to 3. That's a powerful card. This is the first I've seen this. Like you just can turn 2 hero power, turn 3 play this guy, and you just have a 3/3 dagger. Huh? Like that's just solid, right? Shine up your dagger real good. But yeah, that's just a solid card. I don't know where this goes, right? Like I don't know if this is a card that's weirdly like good enough to see play in any deck despite being really powerful because it isn't necessarily synergistic with like, kind of any fundamental strategy. But if there's just like kind of a good stuff tempo rogue, this definitely feels like a powerful card. I mean, maybe this just sees playing like Excavate Rogue because you're just like, hey, I can just play, I can just play my weapon on 1, play like a thing on 2 for tempo, play this, have a very powerful tempo swing on 3. Because one of the issues of that rogue deck can be that they kind of fall behind, and don't get time to sort of leverage all of their advantages they gain from Excavate and all their bounce effect. And this can just be like, all right, boom, weapon plus body, just seems pretty solid. So yeah, this seems like it's just like a good card that can do a lot of solid tempo work for sure. Yeah, maybe this is what you bring in your hand buff deck. You probably wouldn't do that tourist because the tourist card is terrible if you're not like leveraging the spell part of it, right? What would you possibly paladin tourist from this? I don't even this card multicasting, right? This card multicasting is sick. I don't know if any of these necessarily like that. I mean, this you could tourist. Yeah, touristing this in. I don't know. This card draw. I don't know. Yeah, tourist being limited to the cards in the set makes it so much. I don't know. It does make it so much less exciting to me. I am just generally much less excited for the mechanic in general than I was when I just started this review, when I thought it worked differently. But I am excited for the overall rogue cards. Like Maestra is super fun. I think Treasure Hunter Eudora is super fun. I think having more things like the Con Man and the Seashill that really sort of push you in the direction of playing a more thief rogue focused style of deck are really really fun. It's exactly the style of rogue decks that I enjoy. So obviously there's already Excavate Rogue, which does play a lot of stuff from other classes. But I think that having it be more dedicated thief rogue style of deck is just a more fun direction to me, and I expect to try some of it. So rogue looks fun, and I'm sure I'll be playing it. Next up, we have Shaman, and we will start with Meltamental, a 3-cost 3/8 taunt elemental, notably. This is permanently frozen, so this is an interesting card. 3/8 taunt is pretty huge for 3. Obviously, being permanently frozen does mean that and lets you silence this. It's just getting in the way, but it's getting in the way of a lot, right? This is kind of Tar Creeper-esque, right? But 3/8 is pretty huge. I am curious to see if you've just a very defensively oriented deck you want to potentially use this in. Again, the elemental tag is a really big deal. Being able to play a shaman elemental deck that can leverage this to play like a longer game is pretty interesting. There are lots of decks that want to attack you, even if even not with minions in the early game, but Excavate Rogue with their weapon, Hand Buff Paladin with their weapon. Lots of things that would need to get through this anyway, even if they're not trying to go face with small minions in the early game. So I think this is actually a pretty interesting card that I'm curious about experimenting with more of a controlling oriented elemental shaman deck. Next, Caress Cabaret Star. While this is in your hand, play 2 different spell schools to transform. I don't know what this transforms into, so we're gonna look it up. Okay, so what this does is each of the spell schools gives you an effect. If you play an arcane spell, it will draw 2 cards. If you play a fire spell, it will deal 6 damage to the enemy hero. A frost spell, it will freeze 3 random enemy minions. A nature spell, it gets +2/+2 in taunt. Holy spell heals you for 6. Shadow spell destroys 2 random enemy minions, and fell spell does 2 damage to all enemy minions. And apparently, no matter what school you cast first, the fell effect of AoEing them will always happen before the shadow effect of destroying 2 random minions, and the shadow effect of destroying 2 random minions will always happen before the freeze effect. So that's kind of cool. That comes from one of the Hearthstone engineers who posted about it on Reddit. It kind of is always best case scenario for it. So this is like a super Lady Najjar, right? Like Lady Najjar would transform into a thing based on the last thing you played. This, based on the 2 things that you play while it is in your hand, gets a couple of effects. So it's an interesting card. There is sort of a theme of Shaman in the set of spell school stuff. So yeah, there's kind of build your own card. Many of them are going to be easier than others, right? Like Nature, Fire, Frost, those are kind of the primary things that Shaman has available to it. A little bit harder to find arcane spells to cast in Shaman, though there is obviously the Tourist card for Shaman. Let's take a look at that, which is the Demon Hunter Tourist, which obviously gives you more access to things like Fell or Shadow from Demon Hunter. But this is a 3-cost 2/2 Carefree Cookie. After a friendly minion dies, summon a random enemy minion that costs 1 more. Whoa. That's a cool card. This just evolves anything that dies. I was just like, hey, what can you get for spell schools? I hadn't seen this card yet. He just throws them into his pot and comes up with something bigger. Huh. Yeah, that's how they can get the fell spell. Yeah, Wish Upon a Star I think is the only arcane spell that actually exists. This I think is actually kind of sick. This is a really, really powerful card. We'll get back to Cookie. We'll get because I was just like, hey, what do you get? And it's like, oh, it's Fel spell. That's how you get the Fel spell. But yeah, so this I think is interesting because you have to cast the spells, right? So like you likely want to be playing a deck that is playing relatively low cost spells that you are happy to cast um, to enable this while it is in your hand. You need to be pretty spell dense in order for this to be a card that is going to get the benefit of things. I do feel like nature is like the easiest in Shaman and is the easiest default for this, which is just +2/+2 and taunt. Getting a 7/7 taunt for 5 is pretty powerful. And then if you manage to, you know, you have like various utility like fire, which is 6 enemy hero is good if you're aiming to be aggressive. Holy, there are obviously ways to generate holy with like the Watcher of the Sun. So yeah, I think this is an interesting utility card. Definitely needs to be a very spell heavy deck to take advantage of it, but is pretty cool. Let's go back to Cookie. So Cookie, the Demon Hunter Tourist, Demon Hunter, we looked at earlier, as far as like what the possible interesting tourist things. Demon Hunter has a bunch of cards that can generate small charge minions, which can certainly be pretty powerful with Cookie, right? Like if you say you have the sigil or the location that generate charge minions, be able to play those into Cookie and get like a bunch more minions can be pretty interesting. But yeah, like overall, Cookie as like, hey, I play some battle cry minions that have like a high cost but low stats, and then manage to kill them, whether by rushing them into things or just by whatever. Maybe I can just kill them myself and just like basically evolve all my minions. Does feel pretty sweet. So you have more evolve effects, matching outfits, 4 cost spell, transform minion into a random one that costs 1 more, then summon a copy of it. Definitely, between Cookie and this, some decent ways to sort of scale up from having big minions, rather things like, I'm trying to think of, there's not like doppelgangster type effects, right? Like I'm trying to think of any other similar sort of things. Obviously, doppelgangster type effects don't necessarily matter because you don't have like the big evolve for everything currently. But this I do feel is a little, like 4 cost to evolve is a lot, right? Obviously you get a copy, but if you hit something bad, the evolve into a copy of the bad thing is pretty terrible. So it seems pretty difficult for this outside of like having things that have cost reduction that you can use this on. Would be pretty powerful. Like if there was like the guy who costs less for each minion you have in play that you can use with this, or like the 3/4 rush guy. Like this with like a sea giant doesn't really work. It just becomes the actually with sea giant it would become 2 copies of the 8/5 reborn rush. Could be pretty cool. But anyway, and this you have Cabaret Headliner. Battlecry, reduce the cost of a spell in each spell school in your hand by 2. So more reason to play like kind of multi-spell school stuff. This is a very powerful effect, right? A 4 cost 3/3 is weak, but reduce cost of a spell at each spell school. Like this lets you reduce, you're only ever going to have, like we said, Wish Upon a Star, Arcane Spell. You're only ever going to have that as your Arcane Spell. And this curves right into it, right? You can play this on 4 into Wish Upon a Star on 5. Obviously, though, if you're playing Wish Upon a Star, you want to be playing a very minion dense deck, whereas this one's you be playing a very spell dense deck. So kind of pulling you in different directions. Malted Magma, 2 cost spell, deal 1 damage to all enemies. 3 drinks left. So this is a pretty powerful spell, right? This can be, especially with spell damage, right? Like this with spell damage, 2 cost 2 to everything. You can scale it by multicasting it too. It would be 6 mana to do 3 damage to all enemies, but again, spell damage alongside this is really, really powerful. It is a fire spell, which does matter. You could potentially get like the first cast of it free with this. I assume, right, that the Cabaret Headliner, if Malted Magma is your only fire spell, I would assume that you only reduce the cost of the first cast of it to 0, and the next ones don't get reduced to 0, because it becomes a new card with the 2 drinks left rather than 3 drinks left. But this is just a very, very powerful card, right? Like 4 cost to do 2 to your opponent's entire board is not by itself super powerful, but the like utility of being able to choose how to split it up, cast it 1 at a time, cast 2, 3 at a time, and the fact that each of them scales with spell damage is really, really, really strong. Next, we have Siren Song. 2-cost spell. Get 2 random spells from spell schools you haven't cast this game. So kind of a Discovery of Magic, but it's giving you 2 and they're random. Seems substantially weaker than Discovery of Magic. And you don't have as many things that care about like casting, multiple schools of spells, quite to the same extent as, say, Mage does with Sif. Next, we have Natural Talent. Get a random Naga and a random spell. They cost 1 less. There's a lot of bad Naga and a lot of bad spells. Feels pretty difficult for this to be a terribly good card. Meh. Seems very unlikely that's going to be a card that sees meaningful play. Next, we have Frosty Decor. 5-cost Frost spell. Summon 2 2/4 elementals with Taunt and Death Rattle. Gain 4 armor. That is a pretty interesting one. This is obviously relatively expensive, right? It's 5 cost, but 2 2/4s, and each of them having Death Rattle gain 4 armor is a very, very powerful defensive effect. It is a frost spell. You can potentially be using it with the things that care about spell schools, that care about reducing the cost of things. This is a 3-cost spell. It's insanely good. This can be something you use with Hagatha. Hagatha up until now has had like a pretty small selection of possible spells that you can use alongside it. Whereas this, gives you a body that makes more bodies, which can be pretty strong with Hagatha. And lastly, we have Razzle Dazzler. Give him the old Razzle Dazzle. Battlecry, summon a random 5-cost minion. Repeat for each spell school you've cast this game. So obviously this is, intended to be a kind of curve capper for spell school style deck. It's fine. Like this is a powerful effect, right? But it's an expensive card, and against a lot of decks, like they're just gonna kill them, right? Like, and this is one of the issues that I have with cards like this that are like, here is your big payoff for your long game plan, that gets wiped out by one mass removal spell, right? Like, I get that, like, hey, here's your payoff. We make a board. But there's such good AoE in, like, all the control classes, up to and including Reno itself, that it is difficult for make a board to be a meaningful payoff at that stage of the game, right? So, like, I think it's cool, but I find it challenging for that to be that good of a overall strategy when your payoff is this. It is, yeah, it's basically Elemental Inspiration. Elemental Inspiration needs you to go a little bit further. This one, if you've cast no spells, this is still a 4/4 with a 5-drop attached, and then it goes up from there. Whereas Inspiration is 1 per, so it's the baseline is a lot higher than Elemental Inspiration, but like maybe you're getting more powerful things because they're 5-drops rather than 4/5 with a random ability. You could theoretically get as a board full of Leroy's. You're not going to, but we'll certainly make a good YouTube video when you do. Overall, Shaman's in. I think this pool of Shaman cards is in a weird space because this is like, again, this is your big payoff, and I like this payoff more than I like a payoff like Sif going this direction, right? Because I think it's more interesting when you have, hey, I'm gonna do a thing and you're gonna react to my thing rather than my thing always kills you. But that said, there's so much good removal in the game right now, in particular, that is challenging for this thing to be worth building up to it, because it's so much more easily removed than it is to actually build up to. So but yeah, I think that I'll definitely experiment with it, but I don't have terribly high hopes for Spell School Shaman being that good, simply because ultimately what you're getting from it feels like it is difficult to win the game with.